Yesterday, on August the 11th, 2022, in Cincinnati, Ohio, a crazy person, for lack of a better term, tried to breach security at the FBI field office in Cincinnati. This man was nuts, and he had been radicalized. That's what I want to talk about today. So I think everybody knows the story by now. Down in Cincinnati, Ohio, yesterday there was a guy who tried to breach security. He was nuts. He had a nail gun. When the alarms and everything went off, he fled. When he fled officers, he went north on I-71, which is a major interstate in Ohio. It connects Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, the three biggest cities in the state. Apparently, he went off the road at one point in time, ran into a cornfield. They had a standoff and exchanged gunfire. He is now dead. This has led to a great discussion and a great debate in our country about, well, it's not really so much of a debate, but there's a lot of accusations of radicalization out there, and I believe that this guy was radicalized. One thing I will say is that maybe we're pointing the finger in the wrong direction as far as radicalization goes. And I want to be clear that when I talk about these subjects, I'm not necessarily playing the blame game, but I think that people need to accept some responsibility for what it is that they're doing. I think the rhetoric that is being used, I'll start with people on the right. Yes, they bear some responsibility for this. Some of the things that Donald Trump has said in the past were ill-advised statements. There is no secret about that. But I think that when it comes to this kind of radicalization, it's not necessarily the right or Trump that needs to do the most to curb their actions. I guess that's the way I'm going to put it. There was, I don't know. For me personally, I think a lot of this began in the year 2020 when there were riots across the entire country. You might say that it was a civil war that had been broken out. Inner cities were being held under siege from these radical groups, Antifa and Black Lives Matter. For some reason, the political left was supporting these groups of anarchists. They were saying things like, Antifa isn't an organization, it's just a principle, it's a thought. They were saying stuff like this. And then they were saying, what, you think that being an anti-fascist is a bad thing? There was bold support for these people that were doing these things, even financial support. There's no debate about that whatsoever. That made this occupation of the United States, it definitely extended it out for a long period of time, much longer than it needed to be done, as well as doing things that were limiting the police officers' ability to stop the siege from happening. I mean, police departments around the country were literally told to stand down. We had autonomous zones in many cities across the United States where police officers were literally told not to go there because these groups had political support for their protest. And we were being told that these people are angry and they have a right to be angry and that they have a right to protest. Now, fast forward a couple of years and we had what happened on January 6th. I believe that what happened on January 6th was, if the stuff that happened during the BLM protest was the extremist left, I believe that January 6th was a response from the extremist right. Not everybody that was there was an extremist, But there was definitely some really bad actors on scene, and they did some very bad things. People on both sides of that equation need to be held accountable. It's not happening, but we're not going to get into that discussion right now. The thing that the comparison I do really want to make is about what's happening literally right now to encourage the kind of extremist activity like we saw in Cincinnati. I want to go back a little while to, was it 2016 when Donald Trump was elected? When he was campaigning, one of his campaign chats was "lock her up." You know, he had entire arenas full of people screaming that they wanted to lock up Hillary Clinton because of the alleged crimes that they believed she had committed while she was part of the Obama administration. Regardless of what you think of the validity of those crimes, there was credible accusations that were being made. And when Trump was running for office, he was making people believe that he was going to prosecute her once he took office. The thing is, when he did finally take office, I don't know if he had any intention of actually prosecuting her or not, but he chose not to. My personal belief is that he probably did want to prosecute her, but the people around him said that would not be a good idea, that the only thing that he would accomplish would be to alienate people around the country who supported Hillary Clinton, because it was a hotly contested election. There were a lot of people in this country that did not want Donald Trump to be president. And by going out and prosecuting Hillary Clinton, he would have just further alienated those people and made enemies of them. Now, let's go ahead and fast forward to, it was 2020 when President Biden was elected. President Biden ran a campaign saying that he was going to unite a divided nation. That he wasn't going to pander to extremists and all these other things. That was one of his main campaign points, that he was a centrist. I'm going to get that off of here. So President Biden ran on the idea that he was a centrist, but then once he takes office, there have been aggressive attempts to criminally prosecute former President Trump by members of his administration and members of his party. We just had more and more and more January 6th hearings that they were trying to call Trump as a witness, trying to label him as a criminal, and there's still a chance that he might be criminally charged out of that. Then we have this incident that happened down at Trump's residence in Florida where the FBI gets a search warrant. They go, I don't know if they kicked in doors or blew up safes or what they did, but it definitely looks as if the current president is aggressively going after the past president. Some people will say, well, that's fine. If the former president committed illegal acts, then he should be gone after and that he needs to be punished for what he did. For this part of the conversation, I would like to go back in time a little bit. We're going to go back in time to President Gerald Ford. President Ford was the man who took office immediately after Richard Nixon, and he ended up issuing a pardon to President Nixon. He was heavily criticized for this, and I've got this article here. I want to talk a little bit about what it said, just to kind of put some of this in context for you. So it says, in a controversial executive action, President Gerald Ford pardoned his disgraced predecessor, Richard M. Nixon, for any crimes he may have committed or participated in while in office. Ford later defended his actions before the House Judiciary Committee, explaining that he wanted to end the nation's divisions created by the Watergate scandal. And then it says later on in the article here, decades later, The John F. Kennedy Library Foundation presented its 2001 Profile in Courage Award to Gerald Ford for his 1974 pardon of Nixon. In pardoning Nixon, the foundation said, Ford placed his love for country ahead of his own political future and brought needed closure to the division of the Watergate affair. Ford left politics after losing the 1976 presidential election to the Democrat Jimmy Carter, which we all know how that went. And then he died in 2006. So this idea of pardoning somebody and putting the needs of the country ahead of your political ambitions is something that Gerald Ford did, and I think it's something that is commendable. It doesn't appear that the current administration is working under the same philosophy. And due to that, there's some legitimately crazy people in the United States that avidly support President Trump. And I believe that the actions of the current administration and of a lot of Democrats at large are doing more to drive these people to the extremes than people like Trump are. That's my position on that matter. And I've brought this up before, and I want to bring it up again. I think this is one of those things that's worth bringing up at every opportunity. I want to remind everybody who's watching now of President Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. When shortly after President Lincoln came into office, the Civil War kicked off. This divided the country between North and South, and you know all the key phrases. You know, it pitted neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. We were a nation divided in the most extreme sense, where citizens of this country were literally murdering each other. Abraham Lincoln was reelected during the war, and he gave his second inaugural address before the war had ended. But even though he knew the war was about to end and that the North, or the Union Army, was about to achieve victory, in his inaugural address, he chose to address the nation and remind them that we are one nation united, and that if we're going to succeed as a nation, we have to remember that. I'll close with the words that Lincoln used during his second inaugural address. And I pray that our elected officials and public leaders heed these words and listen to them carefully as they choose the path that they will go in the future. It's with malice towards none and charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up this nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which we may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace amongst ourselves and with all nations.